Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Everybody knows I'm an open book. Everybody knows what I'm going to do. Cut taxes very substantially and create a great economy like I did before.
I am offering what I describe as an opportunity economy, and the best economists in our country, if not the world, have reviewed our relative plans for the future of America.
Welcome to this whistle-stop edition of Voternomics, where markets and politics collide. And we're talking about the first debate between the former President Donald Trump and the Vice President and Democratic nominee Kamala Harris. It was hosted last night in Philadelphia by ABC News. I'm Stephanie Flanders, Head of Economics and Government at Bloomberg.
I'm Allegra Stratton.
And I'm Adrian Wooldridge.
And Tim O'Brien is here, Head of Opinion for Bloomberg. I mean, Tim, this was President Trump's sixth debate, but I think it's fair to say it was the first in which he's been so often on the defensive. I mean, Kamala Harris came with a plan to bait him, clearly, and let voters see the Donald Trump that is least popular with those crucial kind of middle-of-the-road undecided voters. But I suspect everyone else who's debated Trump has also had a plan. Hillary Clinton surely did. But the difference seemed to me, staying up in the early hours, was this time it worked. I mean, I think a lot of that came from Kamala Harris just having the confidence to pick a fight with him. I mean, she wasn't brilliant, but she was kind of the alpha female, and I don't get the impression Donald was really ready for that at all.
Well, also, time has gone on. In 2016, he was less of a known quantity. I think his weak points were less known to his opponents. If you ran tape of Harris last night against Hillary Clinton in 2016, he was also younger then, and he's noticeably degraded just physically since 2016. He's hard of hearing. He's more mush-mouthed. He's hunched over. He's not as acute as he once was. One of his primary skills is performance art, not policy. And as a performance artist, he's clearly degraded. So there was that set of factors at work. And then secondarily, and I think probably most importantly, is she did her homework. And she came into it knowing that how you get Donald Trump off balance in any forum is it's not about policy. It's about going after his sense of himself because he's narcissistic and insecure. And to me, the kind of pivot point in the whole debate was when she mentioned that people were getting bored at his rallies and leaving early. And I looked at his face at that moment. You could sort of he sort of froze. And it led him then to give also one of the most bonkers answers of the night.
And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
What they have done to our country by allowing these millions and millions of people to come into our country, and look at what's happening to the towns all over the United States. And a lot of towns don't want to talk. It's not going to be Aurora or Springfield. A lot of towns don't want to talk about it because they're so embarrassed by it. In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
And I don't know if he meant that as a commentary on inflation and grocery prices, which had been one of his bugaboos, or it's just one of his inflammatory things about immigrants. I think probably definitely the latter. And then he came back to say, but my rallies are really popular. They're the most popular in history. She was a little unsettled at the beginning of the debate. I think once they got into abortion and then she teed him up with that statement, it was her debate from there on in. And he just got more and more like Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men. He was raging against the universe, probably more like King Lear than anything else.
So did his team have a strategy and he didn't execute it, or did they just not have a strategy?
Yes. There's always
you
can never have strategy and Donald Trump in the same sentence because he doesn't listen to other people. He believes he's a force unto himself. And he never really
preps
thinks
for them.
Strategically.
We know this.
He thinks emotionally. And I know for a fact that the guidance he was getting from his team was to be a kind, nice Donald. But that's not who he is. He's a juvenile, nasty man at his core. And that's the person who showed up.
Even if you're going to be the nasty Trump, you could be the nasty but reasonably disciplined Trump. And what she was very successful. He was quite disciplined at the start. And I think we could talk a little bit about the economy section because it was probably his best section. And talked about tariffs and some other things. He's stuck to some of the topics that his advisors will have been telling him to, but he couldn't help himself once she was sort of needling him, going into his sort of rally mode.
Well, I mean, I think one of the virtues of Donald Trump in the past is he's had a very good sense of humor. I mean, cruel and unpleasant sense of humor, but he was able to tell a joke and amuse people and make people feel a bit good about their resentments. That was completely absent. I mean, he seems like a bad-tempered, grouchy old man, the sort of people that all too many people will know from their homes, sitting in front of Fox News, agreeing with it and talking, agreeing with every sentiment on Fox News. He seems a bit past it.
She also, remember when Tim Walz was first nominated, and one of the things that people said was one of the reasons why he'd sort of caught fire when people were campaigning kind of informally to be her running mate, was that he'd sort of had this line about, they were weird, that there was this weird stuff that Trump and Vance were talking about.
Very effective.
And he wanted to sit round a Thanksgiving table and not have a weird argument with his aunt or his uncle about something strange. And she was really channeling that at various times. She was he was there, he had he had his kind of mugshot pose for most of it in the two shot when you could see one next to the other. And she was she was very effective at saying, this is a man who just wants us to be shouting at each other all the time and divisive. And we don't want to go back to that. I thought she delivered that. It was obviously prepared, but she delivered it very well.
Think about the fact that he wasn't aware of how to handle the split screen, because it so did Biden in their June debate. And Biden didn't know how to handle it, and maybe couldn't because he looked catatonic. When Trump was speaking, Biden was sort of looking out into space and slack-jawed, and it was like, is he actually breathing? And you would think anyone watching that debate, and especially Trump, he's a former reality TV star, he understands the power of celebrity and the visual mediums, that he would have had in his mind, don't stand there repeating the look of your mugshot in Georgia.
Well, except for it worked so well for him, right? So he thought, this is a shot that people like. But, I mean, to your point, Adrian, about having been funny, it is true that people have sort of found him amusing. But it is interesting, given the one thing that she didn't get him on was talking about her laugh, although she did laugh several times at him, and I wondered whether he was going to go there. But he's talked a lot about her laugh, but, as people have commented, it's very hard to find him laughing. He doesn't seem to ever laugh. So I think even that played against. He seemed just very negative, very dour. And I have to say, Allegra, I mean, as just being a woman for a moment, one has always thought, gosh, the prospect of debating Donald Trump as a woman, even more challenging in some ways. And certainly the risk is you will come across, as Hillary Clinton did, as someone who was terribly well prepared and really felt she just deserved to be listened to. Why would you listen to this awful man?
A SWAT.
Yes, a SWAT, exactly. Though you don't say SWAT in America, but yeah, absolutely. But I thought what was really interesting about the way she did it was like that second step. I remember having a professor who would say, there's learning a difficult text, and then there's learning to be knowing it so well you can just walk around in it. She didn't just know her debate prep. She was then able to walk around in it, and when he mentioned something, when he said, "You're Biden," she was like, "Oh, great, I can do the line that I'm not Biden, and by the way, I'm a different generation from Biden and you, Donald Trump." I thought it sort of showed that if you are brave enough, it's actually easier to debate him as a woman, do you think?
Yeah, and gender is also playing a different role from the one it played before with Hillary Clinton, because abortion has so been electrified as a political issue that she is now the standard bearer for defending abortion rights. So whereas before with Hillary Clinton it hadn't been weaponized in that way, it is now a political battering ram for her to make all women across America very anxious about this guy. So I don't think that was a thing back then. Trump also tried to kind of do a little bit back at her where he's like, "I'm talking now."
Wait a minute, I'm talking now. If you don't mind, please. Does that sound familiar?
Subverting the kind of the previous charge of, let me finish. She is a prosecutor. She is a power in the land. She is superb. The worry had been that previously during the Democratic primaries back in the day, she was wooden. I don't know why she was so off her pace back in 2019 and 2020, but she's now, with this nomination, got a new confidence I don't think people saw even as vice president.
We didn't see it, frankly, in the CNN interview last week.
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. I think it's not just that Trump had a really bad evening, but she had a really good evening. in the sense, well, she was slow to start, but she got off some really
the stakes
good
were
lines.
so high.
She came across as likable, charismatic, and actually quite articulate, which I wasn't expecting because she'd been quite inarticulate in the past.
Quite articulate.
Well, no, I'm saying that because of our expectations.
She has had some shockers.
Yeah.
But my queasiness, and I really want you to kind of give us a kind of gauge on this, Tim. My queasiness is sometimes with Donald Trump, the sort of rambling shamblism works for a bunch of people at home. We look at it and think how inarticulate, incoherent, and rambling, and then he gets a spike in the polls, or people go, yeah, it's kind of reassuring because he's not super clever and he's not super shiny and he's not really he doesn't make me feel stupid, or because Kamala she is so polished and so assured. Plus, I think what we are learning about voters is some people that makes them feel lower in the self-esteem. So I'm just wondering, has it this time? Does that work for Donald Trump, or actually this time is it just to Stephanie's point, weird and incoherent? It's just too much.
It will continue to work for him with about 30% of American voters, and it will always work for him with those voters. And there are long roots to that, the most recent of which is the 2008 financial crisis, in the wake of which neither political party in the United States addressed the needs of middle-class Americans who saw their mortgages, pensions, and hope evaporate.
Living standards.
And Trump filled that vacuum when he campaigned in 2015 and 2016. And he basically said, I'm on your side. The oppressive federal bureaucracy and all these people of color sneaking across the borders are the ones doing you in, and I will go after them on your behalf. And he'll have the hearts and minds of those voters probably forever. But moderate and independent voters are not there.
But if you look at the reaction to this debate, it's quite interesting that the MAGA world reaction has not been, he's on our side, he said some really good things. They've been really quite shocked by how bad his performance is, I think.
So he's becoming the new Biden.
He's becoming, Elon Musk says, well, he's obviously had a bad night. It's very hard to go through that. But I still
think they'll vote for him. The electoral impact of it, I don't think is abandonment.
Maybe.
It's embarrassment,
but the other
not
thing
abandonment.
is the memes that have taken off on Twitter and everywhere else. They're all very bad for him, particularly on the issue of roasting pets or eating pets.
The ones we see.
It's full of people putting pets in the oven and barbecuing them and doing
we go
all
back
that
to
sort of
one
thing.
sec?
That's not
Go
good
ahead.
for him.
No, you go ahead.
We're sort of segueing into sort of reality check zone, and I'm interested, Tim, I mean, when you look at the polls afterwards about, which we know in the end don't make that much difference, you've often had polls that he was perceived to have lost, and it didn't make any difference. He was perceived to have lost in the debates, at least on points, in debates against Hillary. And you had, I think, most of them have shown 38, 45, depending on which one you look at, still thinking that Donald Trump won the debate. Obviously a majority thinking Kamala Harris won. And I just wonder, for the first 15 minutes was about the economy. He was more or less on message. She was fine, but definitely not great. A lot of people will have just turned off after that. Do you think it certainly is possible that this does not move the needle at all. We saw that even after the most catastrophic debate, the first debate, had a huge impact on the race because it changed the candidate. The polls themselves barely moved after that first debate. We saw a few points, but that was probably the most catastrophic debate that any candidate has ever had. So are we inevitably going to be surprised by how little this affects anything?
I don't know the answer to that. I think that, debates have a mixed record in terms of whether they're predictive or they have an influence. The thing to remember about what's transpired between late June and now is that Trump was ahead by 3 to 6 points in various swing states. That gap has completely closed, and in some cases, Harris is ahead of Trump. And in Florida, it's only 2 points. That has to terrify the Republicans. If Florida flips, Trump loses. And it's a generational change for the GOP. I think that, a couple things to remember or focus on, and I was thinking about it when you asked Allegra that quick question about women and gender, is that when Hillary Clinton campaigned in 2016, one of the campaign mottos was, I'm with her. And what Harris is saying is, I'm with you. She's not denying that she's a candidate of color or obviously that she's a woman, and she strategically embraces that when it's useful. But she has, I think, the strength of character to say, I'm not doing identity politics here. I'm trying to deliver solutions to voters. And that's a really powerful place to be. And I think the Kamala Harris who has emerged on this international stage since being anointed as Biden's successor is not a Kamala Harris any of us saw before. And I think it's a lesson in people who are on the ground with one another in any organization, whether it's politics or companies or families. You know people better when you're with them every day. And clearly the sharpest Democratic operatives in the land, from Nancy Pelosi on down, knew that she had evolved. And there will be a very interesting TikTok written someday of what happened when Biden got nudged onto that stage, self-immolated, and then with like clockwork, the party
TikTok,
coalesced
you mean a very
around
detailed
her.
account?
Yeah, because I think there were probably some people in the White House who knew he would embarrass himself, and the only way to get him out of the race was to humiliate him publicly.
Now you're the one sounding
Dark
like a conspiracy
conspiracies.
theorist.
Yeah.
Well, I just think it's practical politics. Politicians are egotists and they don't move easily. And then the speed and the alacrity with which she was put in place and how she's risen to the occasion, people knew she could do it.
But quick question on that. I mean, that Kamala Harris doesn't go away in that there still is that record. I mean, how many staffers has she kept with her through from the beginning of being vice president to now, or to shortly before becoming the nominee for president? Like, not many. So there's a kind of...
I mean, people think that's a virtue when a man moves through an incompetent staff, and when a woman does it, it's that maybe she's a difficult
difficult
boss.
life for Trump to push that one.
I don't think
people do think it's a virtue. As someone who's worked in politics, I don't think it is a virtue when people turn through people very quickly. You need who are your kind of long-term confidence. I'm not saying I think it disqualifies her or that she's going to be a bad president because of it. I'm just saying that slightly poor performing Kamala Harris, how much of that is going to come back to the fore at some point?
In terms of advisors she's had, I mean, you're right that she's gone through that. There is a double standard because clearly, as Adrian says, Donald Trump's not the one to talk about having gone through lots of people. I thought if we just talk briefly about, I mean, there were quite a lot of areas where she could have, one of the failures that Donald Trump had is he didn't get enough onto, whenever the discussion had moved to her flip-flops and her weak areas like immigration, she would just sort of rather, very obviously and transparently pivot back to something that would bait him and distract him. But it did mean that she got away with some of that. I thought, though, there was a bit more substance on foreign policy, or at least more discussion on foreign policy than I had anticipated. You talked about Gaza, talked about Ukraine, where he was unwilling to say that he wanted Ukraine to win. Even in that earlier section, she took the offensive on China in an interesting way. How did you think she was, Tim, on foreign policy?
My own bias is that I think the United States has to be a citizen of the world and that we play an indispensable role in global security and our partnership with our allies in Western Europe and further abroad. And I thought her most effective statement of the night was how she described America's leadership role in the world, her commitment to national security. I thought she was excellent on Ukraine. She was excellent on Gaza. She was excellent on China. And all three of those theaters are perilous right now. China could invade Taiwan. Gaza is a potential tinderbox for the rest of the Middle East. And if we don't stand up to Vladimir Putin in Ukraine, he becomes an even more predatory presence throughout the rest of Europe. And I think the essential player in every one of those theaters is the United States, for better or for worse. And she made a statement of purpose around that I thought was spectacular.
It's not just that she did very well on that. It's also that Trump did very badly on that, in the sense that he has dealt with a great many people. He's been president for 4 years, and he didn't make any real use of that depth of experience or knowledge or comforting the world by saying that I know these people, I can deal with them, I'm a man who makes deals. He made nothing of that.
In fact, he made the bonkers statement of Viktor Orban.
About Orban.
Yeah, he was citing as a counter witness Viktor Orban.
So nothing, no Nixonian sort of depth of experience. And the other thing was immigration, again, which is one of his strong things. It's one of the things he's head on in the polls. People are worried about it, and he fluffed it completely. He didn't talk about people's real fears about immigration. In fact, again, sorry to mention this line, but he made it all about cats and dogs, which was, a crazy waste of time.
That had been a debunked meme. And the issue where average Americans fear immigration is that their jobs are going to be taken away.
Not that they're going to eat their pets.
Not that someone down the block is raiding, the kitchen and and making dinner out of their
eating
cat.
fluffy.
I mean, I slightly disagree with you, Tim, in the sense of I suspect probably the bit her advisors will have been least happy with, or at least will not be so excited about, is her fulsome defence of the role of America in the world, which is not to say she shouldn't say it. But I think what is the only bit of the foreign policy that she spoke to that is very popular is being tough on China, which was again sort of taking the game to Trump. And I thought it was very interesting that she went on China first and even managed to insert the sort of reference about the origins of COVID and accuse him of being too close to Xi. And talking about Gaza, his response was she hates Israelis and Arabs, which I thought was a fantastic statement.
She hates Israel. If she's president, I believe that Israel will not exist within 2 years from now. And I've been pretty good at predictions, and I hope I'm wrong about that one. She hates Israel. At the same time, in her own way, she hates the Arab population because the whole place is going to get blown up.
You really can't have it both ways.
I don't think foreign policy has ever turned a U.S. election. Most U.S. voters don't care about it. And I do think that leadership means you articulate and get out in front on issues that voters aren't either in touch with or in agreement with, but because it's the right thing to do. And we're in a perilous place right now globally. Yeah. And if the U.S. doesn't assert itself and have someone with the clarity and commitment that she articulated last night in spades, even Joe Biden, who is credited as being the savant on foreign policy, he never articulated it as well as she did last night. And I think that stands in her favor.
So next steps. Do we actually think this is going to change the race?
60% of independents in the wake of the poll said she won. And I'll sound like a dead horse because all three of us have talked about this multiple times together, I think, by this point. But it's going to be 7 swing states in November. And the pivotal votes in those swing states will come from moderate and independent voters. And I think they're not only moving to her noticeably, I think they will move to her en masse. And I think that momentum, the clips they'll be able to now, the Democrats have a lot of money. Airwaves are going to get flooded in Nevada and Arizona of Donald Trump saying your neighbors want to eat your cats.
And saying that he has a concept of an
idea.
Concept of an idea on health.
Concept of a plan.
Yeah.
When he was asked, what are your economic plans? And he said, I have a concept of a plan. And what are your healthcare plans? I have a concept of a plan. He has no concept of anything, actually.
I was one thing, and I don't know, Allegra, maybe from a messaging standpoint, the one thing that I thought was a bit confused in the sort of Kamala messaging was that, clearly Project 2025 has had a lot of resonance, and she mentioned it a couple of times because she knows that even when people don't know anything about it, they kind of know it's bad, and he distanced himself from it. But you can't say you've got no plan, which she did repeatedly, but then there is a plan and it's 2025. And I thought that was one area where, which do we think is going to be strongest for her? That he has an evil plan, or that
you've got no plan?
Actually, I recognise that from
yeah,
somewhere.
Because it's not very original. And it is quite tedious how so much of politics is not particularly clever or original, but it just connects and it just works, and the simple is usually best. I think you're right. I'm not even sure. I think you're being very flattering to sort of Middle America. I'm not sure most people in Middle America will be cognizant of it. So I would have thought she'd be better off sticking to kind of there is no plan, this guy rambles.
And do we think they should do another? That was the other thing that came straight after the debate. You had JD Vance saying it wasn't cats they were eating; it was the city geese, which I'm not sure is a lot better. You had Donald Trump go into the spin room, which is very unusual. But you had the Kamala Harris team saying, "Yeah, bring it on. We'll do more debates."
And Trump said that's because she lost, that she wants another one.
Tim, do you think, or Adrian, do you think there'll be another debate? Do you think she should do a debate on Fox? Because it seems pretty clear that if there was another one, it would have to be on Fox.
Neither of them have anything to gain by doing another debate, but for very different reasons. She now has all of the firepower she needs from a debate. And his advisors must think, well, should we do another debate or should we just drive a car into a wall as fast as possible? Because he won't change in the next debate. He can't rescue himself from himself.
He's deteriorating.
Because it was himself on the stage last night. King Lear howling against the moon, not listening to anyone else, and in this sort of pathetic, angry growl.
Well, we will, in a week's time, we shall probably find that the debate itself has had very little impact on the race. And the most important thing that did happen last night, of course, was that Taylor Swift, the most powerful childless cat lady in the world endorse
The self-identified
Kamala
childless
Harris.
cat lady.
And I can't help thinking that will have more impact than anything we've said or anything we heard.
And she had a link in her post to voter.org. So it will produce fundraising and voter turnout just in very practical ways.
And she encouraged people to actually make up their own mind, which I thought was pretty classy, sort of half an hour after the debate finished. Thank you very much, Adrian, Allegra, Tim.
A privilege to be here.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of Voternomics from Bloomberg. It was hosted by me, Stephanie Flanders, with Allegra Stratton and Adrian Wooldridge and Tim O'Brien. It was produced by Summer Sadi. Production support and sound design by Moses Andam. Brendan Francis Newnham is our executive producer. Sage Bowman is head of podcasts. Please subscribe, rate and review this podcast wherever you listen to it.